going to record. And you're probably all got pop-ups saying it's recording. Hello, my name is Sean Sullivan. I'm going to be your moderator today for our bi-weekly SIG CLI meeting. And I'm going to get directly into we've got quite a few announcements. It's been 2 weeks since we've had a meeting. We didn't have a meeting last scheduled Wednesday 2 weeks ago because of KubeCon EU. I hope though anybody who was able to attend had a good time. And that's actually the first item on our agenda or announcement is that there's a SIG CLI talk at KubeCon EU. I still don't have the link. I will put it in there if once I am able to get my hands on that.
I'm just doing that.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Maciej. Does anybody who went there would you like to say a couple words? And if not, no big deal. We'll just move right on to the next stuff.
Yeah, we can probably cover that a little bit later when we have time. Got
it. Okay, so our next announcement is let's go over the release 125 dates. So the enhancement freeze is coming up fairly quickly. It's coming up within the next a little over 2 weeks on Thursday, June 16th. The code freeze is out in early August 2nd, and the release is scheduled for Tuesday, August 23rd. This release, the lead, if you want to know who to reach out to, is CC Huang, who's at Google. And the KEP template has been officially updated since we are focusing more on reliability and on testability and on testing. And so the KEP has been updated accordingly. So please have a look at this new KEP for any of the enhancements that you're trying to get in within the next 2 weeks. So in addition, for this particular release, there are no manual cherry picks. There's an automatic release branch fast forward job now running for this release. That sounds pretty cool. Our next item is the K8's triage robot will not be closing important triaged bugs. So issues that are marked with bug, triage accepted, and either priority critical, important, etc., will no longer be closed by the robot. There used to be, after about, I think it was 90 days, you would go through stale, and then eventually the issue would be closed. And so that, if you want to know more about that issue, go ahead and click through that link. But the important triage accepted bugs will no longer be automatically closed. Does that make sense? Okay, on to our next. So the next item is the release cadence survey is now closed. The results are summarized, and if you want to know the TLDR, it's that a significant majority prefer having 3 releases per year. So we've up until now had about 4 releases per year. It looks like we are moving to 3 releases per year. I don't have any timeline on that, but please click through on that issue if you'd like to know more about that.
We already moved, right? We moved last year to 3 releases per year. So this is confirming that we're going to keep that.
Yes, correct.
Oh, okay.
The exact thing.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Is that Katrina?
Yes.
Thanks, Katrina. Okay, so even though KubeCon EU just finished 2 weeks ago, we actually have the deadline day after tomorrow for the North American CFPs. If you'd like to present at KubeCon North America in Detroit, you have until Friday at about midnight Pacific time. I've included the link to submit your proposals. So also there's a new Python client 23.6. Please click through those links if you are a Python clientista. And finally, we were connecting here through Zoom. There is a Zoom client vulnerability. So please check your client and the version and make sure it is above 5.10.0. I believe the latest client is 5.10.6. Please check your clients to make sure that you are not vulnerable to this particular exploit. Okay, so why don't we get into introductions? I know there's at least, it sounds like there's at least one person who was met the SIG CLI folks or got more interested in KubeCon EU and is here for the first time, it sounds like. Would anyone like to introduce themselves to the rest of your SIG CLI colleagues? And if you're new, please introduce yourself if you're up for it. No problem if you're not.
I can. I work with Katrina at Shopify and have been interested in a long time in contributing to open source Kubernetes. And so I am making an effort to follow through with that.
Pleasure to meet you.
Hi, I'm Nishit. This is my first time here, and I was at the SIG meet and greet. I got excited about SIG CLI. Met a couple of folks from here who motivated me to join the SIG meetings, and I look forward to contributing to SIG CLI.
Great, pleasure to meet you.
Hi team, this is Surya. I'm from India, Bangalore. So I'm pretty much excited what Kubernetes is doing, and currently I'm learning Kubernetes along the side. I'm pretty much interested to contribute back to the community, and that's why I'm here today and want to get connected with all of you.
Oh, pleasure to meet you. Thanks for joining us.
I'll do a quick intro as well. I'm Joel. I work for Red Hat. I recently raised a PR for a SIG CLI owned project, CLI runtime, and that got Marche thinking about some refactoring. So I've come to listen to what he's got thoughts on there about.
Cheers, pleasure to meet you. Yeah, I think the controller runtime is one of the topics today, right?
Yes, it is the CLI runtime.
Oh, sorry, I said controller runtime, sorry. I've been digging into that a little bit recently. Okay, great. So why don't we get into our, thanks for all those introductions. We appreciate you joining us. We know you have things to do, and we appreciate you taking time to be with us. So the first topic is for Mache about duplicate flags. Would you like to take it over?
Yeah. So during our last Blockerbug scrub, we stumbled upon an issue where one of our users specified the namespace flag twice, which for me was an obvious thing for quite a long, and I close it as a as not a fix, as we won't fix it because that's how it works. I then also tweeted about the fact, and it turned out that there was a lot of discussion back and forth. A lot of people were suggesting that this should actually be an error, or at least ideally that there is a warning that you're specifying a particular flag twice. I started digging more, and it turns out that in case of Git, you will actually get the exact same behavior. I can't remember whether that was on Twitter or somewhere else, but I got to a link that is open against Cobra, raising the exact same problem. So Cobra currently does not allow you to differentiate between these options. So you can't say, oh, I want to be warned, I want to have an error, or do anything with it. It will silently ignore this fact and will always pick the last one. That's what you get with any kubectl commands today. So in my particular case, in the agenda, I gave kubectl get pod, and then I specified namespace X and namespace Y. If you invoke that, you will get all the pods from a namespace Y. X will be silently ignored. There will be no information about this fact. So I started thinking how we would feel about it. I'm positive that we cannot break people that might accidentally have the namespace specified or any other flag specified multiple times. But giving warnings is something I'm willing to consider for this particular case. Of course, it will require us to involve with Cobra, which is a topic of itself, and I've already spoke with John McBride because he's one of the primary maintainers of Cobra currently, and we will want to engage with the Cobra community and help them maintain Cobra long term, especially that we rely heavily on Cobra in kubectl, and pretty much every other CLI within Kubernetes landscape and around it relies on Cobra, which is written in Go. So I guess that we will have to work on this, and warning seems probably the most gentle approach. And I was curious what other people think about this particular problem, if they stumble upon it, if they knew about it beforehand. It just so happens that I've been with Kubernetes almost day one, and for me it was pretty obvious, but it turns out that's not the case.
Did you say Git has the same behavior?
Yes, if you do Git checkout, when you do checkout, you can create a branch. So if you do Git checkout -b x -b y, it will only create the latter branch. I would expect that it could theoretically create both branches, but only check out the last one. No, you will only get the last one created and checked out presently. It won't create both.
I ran into this when I was doing the diff environment variable to pass full flags and stuff. And a lot of this is done by a kernel system call to parse the flags. There's like a kernel library that parses the flags. I don't know if pflag uses it, but if that bug is present in Git in the kernel, then I would assume that's the accepted behavior across the whole Linux ecosystem.
That's a viable option as well. But I probably would have to double check how we could approach it. Joel put in the chat comment that if you specify an array, it will accept all the values. And yes, that is perfectly acceptable and not expected. If you say that you are accepting array, it will nicely consume all the values, and that's what a lot of people will actually expect. The problem is if you don't expect array but a single value and you specify the same flag multiple times, it won't error out, it won't warn you, or it won't do anything. It will silently ignore everything except for the last one, which is on one hand, from what I remember, I've never seen any tool that I've used complain about multiple flags specified with the same flag specified multiple times. From my own personal experience, is usually just silently pick the last one. So if it's the case, like Eddie says, that this is the default behavior across the Linux environment, then I probably will leave it as is and won't even bother addressing that one. But
on the topic of whether it's like due to some sort of kernel bug, I don't think so. Like if you look at the Cobra issue that you linked, it looks like it's already possible to detect the situation that they've passed multiple values, which means it's fundamentally possible to do so. Maybe we want something more seamless in Cobra than what exists now. I don't know. We'd have to try it out and see how ugly it is to use, but it looks like it's already possible for us to do this warning if we want to. Yeah. Which, by the way, I'm in favor of. I think that sounds user-friendly. Like, I don't think there's a good use case for wanting to have your first argument ignored. So I think it would be helpful of us to omit that. So I support it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to find some time and look into what's possible with Cobra or what we would need to fix there, and then push this forward. Are there any other opinions, suggestions, questions? Okay, moving on to, yeah.
I think it's called like get options or get options short or something.
Yeah, I remember those roughly from the old days, but yeah.
Somewhere.
So the second one and the third one that Eddie linked are interconnected, because the printing warning when multiple CRDs conflict is something that we've been discussing a while back. And that's not only when multiple CRDs conflict, but also when you have multiple resources hidden under the exact same short name. So for example, you probably are all aware about the O short name, which is defined by default within a Kubernetes, which allows you to get pods, replica sets, replication controllers, and a bunch of resources under that. Every author can actually specify their own short names or aliases for a group of resources. So the problem with that is that it is possible that multiple resources will have either the exact same short names, or that multiple resources will be hidden behind the aliases depending on the environments. At the time when we were discussing this originally, I was very hesitant on introducing any in-depth information. But recently, Joel approached me that they are struggling with a similar problem. And I started talking with David around it, that if we could potentially print a warning around the topic, pointing that, oh, there are how many, and we'll have to figure out how the warning will look like, but that's probably just a minor thing, to put that kind of warning. And as Joel was working on the PR, it turned out that my default answer was, oh, can we just pass over the IO streams? And Joel returned to me with an answer that, well, we can't, because we would be introducing cyclical dependencies, because the builder where we're trying to put the imprinting relies on the IO, on the generic CLI options package within which the IO streams live. So the problem is that when we initially created the CLI runtime, a lot of the stuff landed in the generic CLI options by default. And currently it is causing us problems. My plan, and I was hoping that I'll be able to create a PR. We talked about it, if I remember correctly, Thursday or Friday last week. And I was hoping that I'm going to be able to sketch the PR, how the new division of the CLI runtime could look like. But for starters, I would just put everything that is related with IO streams to their own package. Probably it will be just called IO or something like that. I need to go through all the stuff that exists currently in the package and see what we can do about it. So I'll try to put a PR up as soon as possible. I know that this will be problematic for all the CLI runtime consumers, because we will be shuffling things back and forth. But I do hope that the outcome, the end outcome, will be beneficial to all of us, in that we will be able to much more granularly control how stuff are connected within the CLI runtime. I'll make sure to send the PR. As soon as I have the PR up, I'll put it on hold, and I'll send an email to the mailing list pointing to the PR, and I'll leave it open for sufficient amount of time for everyone to have their own opinions about the approach, or eventually about different changes. Ideally, I would like to do it, if we are planning to do the reorganization, to do it at a single shot, so that people that are consuming this will be faced with eventual changes only once instead of multiple times. So if you have opinions about how we would want, how you would want to see CLI runtime restructured, please be on the lookout for that PR and make sure to comment and review it as soon as it will be up.
So would the reorganization change, say, plugins which are using the CLI runtime, or any other clients that are, so if we're assuming that it's only kube control that's using this, then that seems like a much easier fix. Whereas if there's going to be a plethora of clients that are depending on this, we may end up like breaking a lot of people.
Yes, they will have to change their import paths. But something similar has been happening in the past within several libraries within the core cube. So that's why I'm saying that if we want to do it, we should do a big bang reorg in a single shot rather than doing this, I don't know, a couple of times over the next couple of releases. Because if people will be upgrading, they will be faced with a single update, just change the path to look like this instead of the current way, and you should be good. That's my suggested approach.
Do we have any official stability policy on this one? I know some of the cube libraries, even the ones that are popularly imported, officially actually don't have stability.
We don't have.
I agree then with the approach.
Okay. So I guess we can, because Eddie, that basically covers your topic as well about the warning.
I have a question about the warning part, though. If that's okay.
The CRD conflict. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that we are hesitant to do this in the previous discussions was the incompatibility with the intentional behavior, where if you have the same kind in multiple API versions, which is something that actually occurs, especially in the older versions, as a resource graduates, or if we move from one API group to the other, we don't want to print a warning every single time the user goes kube control get deployments just because extensions v1 beta 1 is still enabled on the API server that they're using. Like, that's really bad UX for a much more common use case than the one that's being addressed by the reason that we'd be adding the warning. So how have we overcome that concern?
Yeah, well, so I just brought this up because Ben raised this to my attention. This was, y'all outvoted me on doing this one. And I saw the PR come across, and I still think it's an issue. I still think we're going to have to address it somehow. As far as your point, Katrina, if I understand correctly, I was always under the impression that this warning would be for CRD conflicts, not built-ins. Because we can tell when a resource is a CRD.
No, we can't. When you're reading the discovery, you are seeing all resources as equal. Yes, you could theoretically look at the priorities of the resources, and we could probably do some additional logic around it.
I mean, we can query the actual CRDs and match on the resources, right? So we can figure out which ones are CRDs.
Well, but why wouldn't we even want, like, even assuming we could do that, why wouldn't we want CRDs to be able to benefit from the same API group behavior as built-ins, right? You have a CRD, you evolve that over time. You have your alpha 1 version and your beta 1 version enabled. Your beta 1 is the default. You want people to type kube control get my thing and get the beta. You don't want them to get a warning every time because the alpha group version exists. I think the same argument applies to CRDs as to anything else. And I've actually seen a case where they have an intentional group like naming overlap with a built-in between a built-in and a CRD, which is a further complication to that. And again, like the API version precedence, it exists for these reasons. And I'm still not convinced that we're not going to improve. We're not going to make the user experience of basically every invocation in those situations that are much more common, worse for everybody.
This is going to keep coming up. So we're going to have to think about it at some point. It is just like with the command line flags, right? It is user error, right? And we are talking about warning on user error for passing namespace twice, right? So this is
right, but the user error is the installation of those two naming conflicts, which it's sometimes an error and sometimes not. And once we're at discovery, we can't tell if it's an error or not. We got to assume that it isn't. It's what I think what we need to consider the user error is the installation of two overlapping group kinds that were not intended to be overlapping, which we need to be throwing at CRD installation time, not to the end user who had nothing to do with installing those duplicates.
right, which we can't do because of how CRDs are installed.
Well, can we revisit that? Because I think that's the appropriate place to make this change, and that we actually don't really have any power to improve that at the stage that we're talking about when we're dealing with discovery information already. The thing has already been installed, the mistake's already been made, the end user can't do anything about it, and we have no ability to detect whether or not it's actually a problem or intentional.
So
Joel, you
just
have
a quick note, we are working to upgrade discovery at the API server to make it more efficient. And we are also, there's a new version of the Open API. There's a V3. And we are also, it sounds like there's discussions to add extra data to the Open API. Not sure exactly how that would.
That
would look,
won't
but-
change anything. The problem will still be still present, because you can easily create a CRD, just like Katrina pointed out, with a short name PO, which is also happens to be a short name for pod.
Right.
So I'm still hesitant. I haven't fully said yes or no to the PR that Joel put together, but it uncovered a different issue that I would like to address in parallel. I'm still trying to weigh in whether to go one way or the other, or how we could do it in a way that maybe that's something that we would have to solve with Eddie's kubectl file, where, oh, I'm a beginner and I want to be provided with additional information, versus the expert mode, the default kind of a mode where, oh, I don't care about warnings, I know what I'm doing. That's an approach that I'm also considering as well. So I'm still not 100% sure yes or no about the warnings, but I want to have the mechanism in place for sure.
I mean, if the concern is that we would be warning on every single invocation, we could write to cache or something that's like, we already warned about this, don't warn again, right?
Not so much that as that the warning, we don't know whether it is actually addressing, like when we see the situation where we have the duplicate name, we don't know if it's a situation where we should warn or not, because there are lots of legitimate situations where the duplication occurs, and it's actually going to be confusing to the end users to show a warning in those situations. So take the deployment existed in 3 different group versions for a very long period of many releases. So just think about that situation occurring, whether you did it because you're evolving your CRD or we have another evolution of a group version kind that's built in. Think about that situation and the effect on the end user when they type kubectl get deployment and we set a warning there. Like, that's super confusing. The average end user doesn't need to know about that. And unless we find a way to screen out that situation from the fix that we're trying to make here, where there's an accidental overlapping installation, I'm going to be a no on the feature. I'm not a no on the principle of warning against the duplicate installation, but I don't think we have any new approach here so far. And the approach that we have proposed I don't think it's viable for the reason described.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't. So the API machinery group realizes that it was a mistake to put a particular kind in 2 different API groups and have moved away from that, and we'll never do that again. So as we move forward, I don't think that we should be, once we get past a particular version, where we don't have to worry about deployment, for instance, and I'm not sure if we're there yet. out of the extensions API, you know, V1, Beta 1 extensions, I don't think that we should be writing code to support that. We recognize that's an error. We're trying to get past that.
It's not
Right,
just
but
different groups though, it's versions.
yeah.
Versions do it. V1, Alpha 1, V1, Beta 1 in the same group has the same problem.
Yeah, but that's
And
still,
of course we want that to be possible.
yeah, but that still
Yeah.
doesn't solve. Even if we solve and we will ensure that there will be no resources with identical names or identical short names, that still doesn't address the problem that there is a open issue that someone can create a CRD with a short name that will conflict with the built-ins, in which case you will be struggling with that. There is a potential that someone can create an identical name, like a deployment. That is not something, I don't know, super unique to just Kubernetes, because someone can create their own deployment controller, their own CRD deployment. It will be called deployment with a short name deploy. The only difference will be it will exist in an entirely different API group, and we can't protect users from those kind of mistakes. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be a mistake. It might be an explicit decision on the user part to use that just to differentiate by the API group. We just need to make sure that we learn our users to use fully qualified names on one hand, and then we'll have to figure out how the warning could be potentially helping rather than disturbing, because I agree with what Katrina says. I would be very mad if I would be seeing a warning every single time I do get PO, because I'm heavily using that and I'm fully aware that PO stands for pods. And if something else is using it, I don't care, because for me, PO is shorthand for pods. I'm super lazy and I like typing less than more. So we'll have to figure out how to properly juggle that. But I'm seeing both sides of the equation. We just have to figure out how to best address it. But the mechanism itself, yes, I want to have it in place. And we'll have to figure out how to best expose that information.
I just noticed we have a raised hand, Joel.
Yeah, the fix. So a lot of this is in response to Katrina, some of your points. So firstly, I hadn't really thought about the inbuilt like deployment where it moved group. Hadn't really thought about that. That's a really good example. I will go away and think about that. The other thing with the versions, the current fix takes into account that things will evolve in versions. So it's only if you have overlapping group kind, not like the version. The version is discarded, so that won't matter if people evolve it. The other thing I was going to say is like the argument about CRD priorities, they are confusing. If you, for example, have two groups that are on the same version, so you have two CRDs, V1, Beta 1, then it seems to prioritize based on alphabetical order. If I then evolve one of those APIs, say the one that is second in the alphabet to a V1, suddenly that then takes priority, right? And I think that's where the major confusion is for end users, is like, I've got two CRDs, one is, foo.bar v1 beta 1, one's foo.baz v1 beta 1, and I say, I'm OC get foo, and I know every time I do that, it's the first group, and then I evolve the second group, suddenly that is changing, and queue control behavior has changed between releases because I've evolved an API group. That's the big problem that I want to try and fix here, is that needs to be stable. At least if there is some way that we have, these overlaps, either, tell users and tell them to put, because even if you just do like the first it even does a prefix match, right? Like if I do the first bit of my fully qualified domain name, foo.ba or whatever it is, that also fixes the issue. We don't need to tell users to do the complete fully qualified domain name. Yes, we probably do want to promote that, but like there are so many ways that people can get stable output, and at the moment no one knows that. So we need some way to tell them.
I always thought it was strange. Yeah, this emphasis on short names for all these reasons, instability and unpredictability of results. I like what Maciej said, that this seems to be a very personal decision. People, you like PO, someone else might like something different. Somebody else might have a different sense of what PO should stand for. And the fact that kubectl sort of hardwires a particular interpretation always seems kind of strange to me. If anything, there should be a choices file on the side, and kubectl can be part of managing that set of choices. But to me, whenever there's an ambiguity, you need to present the user with that ambiguity and let them resolve it. And then we can remember the resolution that they had. But then that, for example, then would say, if I then run that same script in a CI/CD context, it'll fail because that context doesn't have that same history, right, of my choices, which is a good thing, right? We want the CI/CD pipeline to use fully qualified names.
So the API server chooses the default version.
Oh, so it's the API server that's making this choice, not kubectl?
Yes.
Okay.
It's based on the REST mapper.
Exactly.
Yeah,
API provides the information about the priorities and the versions available for all the groups. And then, well, theoretically that the REST mapper is part of the client Go, but that knows based on that information which version should be picked. And just like Joel said, there's the version priority and the alphabetical order that that is being taken into account when picking one over the other.
So the REST mapper is just a wrapper around the discovery from the API server, right? So this is all determined by the API server.
Wow, so that makes
no,
it
because
harder
it all happens. It all happens client side, right? In kube control, it gets the REST mapping, and then it can see the different groups and versions, and it's the one that prioritizes those and chooses that priority. So this all happens client side.
Okay.
Yeah.
From the information from the API server.
Yes, but that only affects the individual groups, right? Like if you've got multiple groups that match your short name or whatever, that's where the problem occurs, because it's then kube control making the decision on which one to present.
Right, and ultimately there's also some cluster operators involved here as well, because they're the ones who are able to find those, like to the point of where the aliases come from. Those come from somebody defining them, like as part of their CRD. Like kubectl isn't inventing those itself; they're in the information that we get back from the server.
On another tangent, I did also wonder, and maybe we'll park this for now, is this a security vulnerability? Like if someone were to manage to install a separate CRD that then could take over a name by producing a higher version priority or something like that, does that then lead to potential security issues for users? If someone created a CRD that was a secret that looked the same, for example, I think in that case, we definitely want a warning, right?
Do built-ins have some inherent precedence as part of it, or no?
Built-ins are by default of higher priority. You can't create a CRD with a higher priority than the built-ins. The built-ins will always take precedence over the CRDs. But Joel's point, I could see that as, I don't know, you have a third-party secret type of a resource, and then you create another one, which is by the fact that is, I don't know, let's say V2 over V1 will take priority over the V1. But then I would assume that it will depend on how the access rights is being dealt with by the cluster administrator. So I wouldn't consider that in the realms of security issues, but rather confusion.
The flipping of the order is a really interesting point, though. The fact that we'd use like between two things in an equivalent group, it would just rely on alphabetizing, and then whichever has the highest priority across, or highest version across both groups. That instability does strike me as something that maybe we could reconsider.
So I don't-
It's not the same thing as what the PR is doing right now, I suppose, but I'm interested in that.
It's
So
also
when you have
not, sorry, it's not dependent on just a particular resource as well. It's that group. Because I noticed this because I was testing something. I had a conflict because I had two objects that were called machine, both in V1 beta 1s. If I now install something else in one of those groups that isn't a machine but is called, whatever, but that's a V1, that one suddenly takes priority. So it's not even like it's just that particular resource being at that version takes priority. It's the group first and then the machine or type, whatever it is, kind. So it's really confusing.
But if I understand this correctly, please correct me, it's mostly when we have the same kind in different API groups, right? It's that this almost only happens then, right? We've seen this actually before, as Katrina said, with what some of these kinds used to be in extensions, V1, beta 1, and then they moved to apps like deployment and stateful sets, et cetera. And yeah, if talking to some of the API machinery group folks, it's like we know that's a bad thing and they're not going to support that anymore and do not suggest that those type of things happen. Within a CRD, we have a way of choosing which version we want. Which one is the current version, the storage version. And yeah, so are we supporting something that really shouldn't be supported? If we're, I understand that there's, yeah. Let's think about this and revisit it. Should I put this as a topic for the next meeting? Because I think there's some really interesting corner cases here.
We will be definitely revisiting the topic. The PR won't go anyway, so there's still the reorg that has to happen first, and then we'll have to revisit to be able to land that PR. But yeah, I haven't had my final word yet on it, so it'll be. Yeah.
Joel, part of what you described was this instability that in what gets returned. I thought that was a very interesting point that could potentially be addressed aside from the controversial warning. Would you be able to write up the situation there and the examples that we talked about for posterity and for when we revisit this discussion?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all the work in this, Joel.
Where would you like that information?
In the agenda, put it under the topic which explicitly calls out your PR.
Cool. I'll add some notes.
Thank you.
Okay, should we move to the next topic? Okay, great. Yeah, that was a good mind bender. Okay, so Marcus, would you like to take over with?
Hopefully this is less confusing. I'm going to share my. All right, can I share my screen? It's gonna. This is quick.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually make you a co-host, and that should allow you to. Let's see if I could find.
Demonstrate it. I do have a link in the agenda for this. You can click on either one of them. One of them is just a comment on the pull request that I started all this with.
So I just made you a co-host. Can you? Okay, I could see this particular issue.
So I think in like December, I started working on trying to get basically the entire kube config able to be set using just the config set command. In the process of that, I just kind of extended the dot delimited pathing that we had to begin with. And last week at QCon EU, it was decided that we probably didn't want to extend the domain specific language of this. And it was suggested that I use a JSON path instead, which definitely makes sense. And so I started working on that. But what I found was that the way that the config object is defined in the client command API here, this config struct, does not actually like reflect the YAML that gets written to file one-to-one. And so what that ends up doing is, if we take this example, like minimal config here, we have users and then we have the experimenter user. If we wanted to get down to the username value for it, we would basically just be reinventing the dot delimited padding that we were using before, users experimenter username. That's like how it would work now. And it was also how it would work if I were to do it with that's also how it would work if I were to just wrap everything in JSON path. So we talked about, or y'all said that you didn't want, well, we all agree that we don't want to support a domain specific language here. So the way that it would be expected to have to get down into that would be effectively this here, except this is for password instead of username. So, which I've made it more explicit here. So it feels like there's three things here. We can either just unmarshal the config onto an interface and just go from there, but that throws a lot of prior work away. And the other thing that we could do is just make a parallel struct that is more one-to-one with the YAML, or we can just continue with the domain specific and wrap it in JSON path. Because right now, as it exists, we could just rip and replace what we're doing now with JSON path minus a couple of things.
What are we missing in the current conflict API that we can't reuse it?
Say it again, sorry.
So you're saying that we would need to make a parallel. I'm looking at it. The first option where we would just unmarshal to interface and lose the typing is not an option. Implementing in domain specific language, that's one of the reasons that when Katrina and I looked at it during KubeCon, and I posted a picture for everyone interested. It just looks like I have a very, very bad name. I really like your PR. So, but I'm leaning towards the second option where, but I'm curious why we would need to have a parallel config struct that is one-to-one with the JSON YAML to unmarshal onto instead of using the currently existing config type.
I wish that I had my other laptop with me right now, because all of the code is there and I haven't saved it anywhere else. So what I'm trying to get at here is that if I use Sorry, go ahead.
I was aware that we will be throwing away the ability to specify the key in the users and so forth by the you would basically use the dot notation to pick a particular entry by name, and you would have to either use a indexed notation or one which matches a name like you have in your example. Both are equally valid and should work.
So the problem is that the way that the struct for the config is laid out is that this doesn't work if we use the currently existing config struct. It has to be like this, because the way that it unpacks itself is it's just like a series of nested maps basically, which is how the navigation step parser today is able to navigate it at all. So this wouldn't work if we were using the existing config.
Does using indexes work, or using indexes have a similar problem?
Yeah, and this is also true. This could be clusters or context as well, and the same is true for all of them. They're all map string, whatever type they are, basically.
Okay.
Somebody also does validation as part of the parsing, which is why there's so many.
Yeah. That reflection and all the changes where we would maintain another DSL just to handle this one was the reason that I was very hesitant on adding it, especially then when I started reading your PR where you were expanding it. I had a deja vu moment from when I was back in the days working with the JSON path, and which already has a lot of this stuff. The only difference is just that particular piece.
Yeah.
I would have to double check if or what we could do with it or how to best approach it. But I would try to push it even at the cost of breaking users with this one, because I think that the amount of users that will be affected will be rather minimal. And the benefit for us maintainers will be significant if we switch users to a consistent experience, especially that JSON path is something that they already are aware of and are using heavily with get commands or any other that allows you to parse the output.
Yeah, it also just like could, if we did have it, like this, we could do, users could do more interesting things like doing user star and then
Exactly.
set, copies.
Exactly.
So yeah, and that's what I would prefer it, and that's why I'm on board for the second one. It's just going to take a long time.
Yeah, I'm even willing to do that parallel config if there won't be any other option, because we could probably figure out a way to do it automatically and have a unit test which will ensure that we have bidirectional compatibility, and that if something is being added to the client Go API, it will trickle down also to kubectl files. And that would be probably the closest and the best approach that I would go with, rather than maintaining DSL just for this, or losing the typing by picking the option 1.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll try to. I don't know when, but I'll try to have a look at it once again, and see what we could potentially get out of it. If you get a chance, play with it a little bit more. Maybe we just need to make sure that this is properly announced to users with regards how this will have to be done in the future. And then
I think something that the parallel config would enable is we could do both for a while and just announce the deprecation.
Yeah.
And so I actually don't know how much effort it would be, because now that I think about it, like I probably just need to copy this and have a config JSON struct and not have it be map string cluster for everything. And that would probably do it. I don't know for sure, but we'll see.
One thing that strikes me is that you are looking at the internal types. Don't we have a client command API v1 types, which might be different?
I don't know.
We do. And if you look at v1 types, can you go back to the file that you had? Okay. In the address bar, type API /v1 types that go.
Oh, hell, am I in the wrong place?
Now
Okay.
here, everything is arrays.
Interesting. Okay. So the way that I got to here is from what's happening in the thing.
So I'm guessing that somewhere in the config parsing, we are just unnecessarily using the internal types rather than using the external types. If it's possible for us to use the externals, even at the expense of explicitly converting that to the external types, I would be in favor of doing the explicit conversion, do whatever it needs to do, and then convert back right down.
I did not know that this was here. This is great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I will work with this one, and we'll see.
Yeah, it's tricky, and I probably my guess is that a lot of the so if you go back to the very early days of Kubernetes, a lot of the we always had two types, internals and externals. Everything, controllers, clients, and everything was using the external internal types. Clients were the only ones using, but controllers and all the logic within the cube was using the internal types. There was a big rewrite happening for a couple of releases to switch everything to use external. So I'm guessing that nobody just cared about client Go bits that much for them to be externalized, let's call it that way. So I'm perfectly supportive of having an explicit conversion. Do whatever you need to do with JSON path, convert back. That's perfectly fine. If you need help with the conversion, invocation, ping me on Slack and I'll have a look. But yeah, it should help with your particular case.
Yeah, this means I don't have to rewrite.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff.
And the conversion is like 3 lines of code.
Yeah.
Back and forth, so 6 in the worst case.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that work, Marcus. Like Mache, I also really like the PR. I just always look like that during code review.
I mean, same. So.
Cool. It looks like we're a minute over. Eddie, is it okay if we get to your topic the next time, or should we have discussion?
This is going to need a cap. So someone replied that already, so we're good. My big thing was I wanted to talk. There's a long-standing thing about getting rid of Speedy for HTTP2. So I want to make sure we don't just shortcut going to WebSockets. Well, we can talk about it next time.
Okay, great. Okay, with that, I will close. As I mentioned, we're a minute over. Really interesting discussions. Again, thanks for joining us, and would love to see you all in 2 weeks. So have a good day.